The fluorescent lights in the executive conference room buzzed as I sat across from Mason Reed, our CTO. He barely looked up from his tablet, already decided before I'd walked in. Between us lay months of my work, annotated docs, architecture diagrams, migration plans for the Phoenix Initiative. "Brinley," he said, finally meeting my eyes with practiced neutrality, "I'm restructuring the Phoenix team. You're moving to an advisory role. Damian Cross is taking over as lead architect. We need his fresh perspectives." Fresh perspectives. Damian had been at peak for 11 months. I'd built our cloud infrastructure from chaos over 7 years, designed every dependency, documented every integration, architected Phoenix from scratch. "I see," I said, steadier than I felt. "When does it happen?" "Immediately. Damian's already been briefed. You'll support as needed, but he's making the calls." I gathered my papers, stood, and walked out, no shake in my hands, no glance back. But something shifted inside me on the walk to my desk. Not anger, something colder, calculated. Back at my corner workstation, the office buzzed the same as always. Developers typing, PMs whiteboarding, Slack pings echoing. But my world had cracked open. 3 emails already waited. Kelsey needing query help, security flagging a vulnerability, a junior dev counting on my code review. All assuming I was still the fixer. I hadn't expected this to feel like theft. That afternoon, I watched through the glass as Damian animatedly presented in my conference room, standing in front of my green marker diagrams. Mason nodded along, asking questions I'd already answered in the docs Damian was skimming, without understanding. Fresh perspectives really meant my caution looked like slowness, my precision like over-engineering. Never mind that I hadn't caused a single production incident in 4 years. Damian's confidence in meetings mattered more. My system wasn't just code. It was hard-won institutional memory. Rollback paths, anomaly detection, scalable design, all dismissed by someone who'd never pulled an all-nighter to undo a deployment disaster. I checked my calendar. Mornings at 6:45, evenings past 9. No lunch in months. I'd been compensating for everyone else's gaps, work that never appeared in my job description. My phone buzzed. "Hey, Damian's asking about the sharding strategy. Can you send him your notes?" I replied, "Everything's documented. Architecture repo, section 12.4. No extra help, no hand-holding, just the truth. It's all there." In that moment, something crystallized. Not rage, clarity. Like a door closing on a room I'd outgrown. I'd believed the myth. Be indispensable, and you'll be valued. Mason just proved how worthless that contract really was. I opened a blank doc and typed 4 lines. Work your contracted hours. Let others solve their own problems. Stop treating every request as an emergency. Loyalty goes both ways. Then I changed my alarm to 8:30 and left the office at 5 p.m. for the first time in years. The subway ride home felt surreal. I'd taken this route thousands of times, but usually after dark, usually exhausted, usually already mentally composing emails I'd need to send the next morning to prevent fires from spreading. Now the evening commute was crowded with people in professional attire, tourists consulting their phones, students with laptops heading to evening classes. An entire world of people who left work at reasonable hours and never questioned whether they had the right to do so. When I unlocked my apartment door, my roommate Bellamy was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She turned, startled. "You're home before 7. Are you feeling sick?" "No, just on time for once." She studied my face with the attention to detail that came from 3 years of living together. "Something happened at work. I'll tell you over dinner." I hung up my coat, feeling the weight of the day settle into my shoulders like stones. But first, I need to change out of these clothes and remember what it feels like to be a person instead of a resource. The next morning, I arrived at 9 o'clock. Not late, 9 was the official start time listed in every employee handbook and employment contract, but for me, unprecedented. My desk had accumulated a collection of sticky notes from the overnight team, each one representing a small crisis that would have had me on Slack at midnight a week earlier. I peeled them off one by one and dropped them directly into the recycling bin without reading past the first line. The office already buzzed with that frantic energy that comes from people who'd been putting out fires since dawn. I booted up my computer, made myself coffee in the break room where I actually took time to add cream and sugar, then settled in to work on the technical debt backlog I'd been neglecting for months while handling everyone else's emergencies. At 10:15, Damien appeared at my desk, his confident smile showing cracks around the edges. Hey, Brinley, so I'm running into a weird issue with the authentication service migration. I know you built the original integration. Mind taking a look? I glanced at my current task, a code review that had been sitting in my queue for 3 weeks because everyone else's fires had taken priority. I'm focused on something else right now. Have you checked the service documentation? His smile faltered slightly. I did look at it, but some of the patterns aren't making sense. Could you just... The integration patterns are all documented in the wiki under the authentication section. I turned back to my screen. If there's a gap in the documentation, submit a ticket and I'll add it to my backlog. He stood there for another 7 seconds, I counted, before walking away. I felt his confusion radiating like heat, but I didn't turn around to explain or soften the boundary I just set. At 11 o'clock, one of the senior platform engineers stopped by my desk. Brinley, quick question about the caching layer architecture. We're seeing some inconsistent red behavior, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Have you opened a support ticket? He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Well, no. I figured I'd just ask you directly since you designed the system. Open a ticket with all the relevant details and assign it to the platform team queue. I kept my eyes on my code review. Someone will triage it according to priority. That's the established process. By lunch, 4 more people had stopped by with quick questions that would have consumed my entire afternoon. I redirected them to documentation, to each other, to the appropriate team leads, to Mason himself. The word no, or its various professional equivalents, came easier each time I used it. The initial guilt faded faster than I'd expected. The afternoon brought a team-wide meeting where Damien presented his modified timeline for the Phoenix Initiative. I listened as he explained his approach. Noting the places where he'd simplified things, I'd deliberately made complex for critical reasons. Redundant failover systems dismissed as unnecessary overhead. Gradual migration phases collapsed into a big bang deployment. Testing cycles cut in half to hit his aggressive deadlines that would look impressive on quarterly reports. Other people in the room nodded along, trusting his confidence. Nobody asked for my opinion, so I didn't volunteer one. When Damien proposed skipping the staging environment phase entirely, I simply took notes and said nothing. After the meeting, one of the senior developers, a woman named Claudia, who'd been at Peak longer than I had, pulled me aside in the hallway. That rollout schedule seems dangerously aggressive. What's your take on it? I think Damien's the lead architect now. He's made his assessment and his decision. But you know this system better than anyone. She lowered her voice. You built most of it from scratch. I documented everything I know extensively. If something's unclear, Damien should ask questions. I started walking toward my desk. I'm not on the Phoenix Initiative team anymore. You should direct your concerns to Mason directly. At 5:03, I logged off while 6 Slack messages sat unread in channels I'd previously monitored obsessively. The office was still humming with activity. Engineers racing to meet sprint deadlines, Damien still in a conference room on a video call with someone from the cloud services team. His forehead creased in visible concentration. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but I pushed it down and walked to the elevator. The evening air hit my face when I stepped onto the street, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd left the office, while the sun was still visible in the sky. By Thursday, a clear pattern had established itself. People kept expecting me to function as I always had. The safety net, the institutional memory, the person who fixed problems before they became visible to leadership, and I kept not doing that. Kelsey cornered me in the break room while I was making tea. Brinley, I really need your input on the database migration strategy. Damien's saying we can skip the data validation phase, but that doesn't sound right to me. You should escalate that concern to Mason directly. I poured hot water over my tea bag, watching the color steep and spread. He's the decision maker now. But you know this system inside and out. She sounded frustrated. You're the one who built the data integrity protocols we're using. Damien's the lead architect. He should have the answers. The words came out gentle, but completely immovable. If he doesn't, that's information Mason needs to have. Kelsey's expression cycled through confusion, frustration, and finally, something like understanding. She nodded slowly and left without pressing further. Back at my desk, the Slack. Channels I'd once moderated were descending into chaos. Questions about system behavior went unanswered for hours. Someone deployed a configuration change to the wrong environment because the runbook I'd maintained hadn't been updated by whoever was supposed to take over that responsibility. Nobody had taken over that responsibility. The assumption had been that I'd keep doing it anyway, out of professional obligation or habit or inability to watch things break. I watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, like observing weather patterns from inside a sealed building. Part of me still itched to step in, to prevent the small disasters that were compounding into larger ones. But I'd spent 7 years preventing disasters, and my reward had been to have my expertise dismissed as insufficient velocity. They could have the speed they wanted. They'd learn what it actually cost. The fascinating part was watching how quickly things unraveled. Systems I'd maintained through constant vigilance began showing stress fractures. The monitoring dashboards I'd set up were still functioning, but nobody was reading them the way I had, spotting patterns 3 steps before they became problems. The documentation I'd written was comprehensive, but it assumed readers would invest time in understanding context and interconnections. Damien's approach was to skim for the specific answer he needed immediately, missing the web of interconnected reasons why things worked the way they did. By Thursday afternoon, 4 separate incidents had required emergency rollbacks. Small things individually, configuration errors, timing issues, misunderstood dependencies. The kind of mistakes I would have caught in code review or prevented with a 10-minute conversation about architectural implications. But I wasn't doing code reviews for the Phoenix Initiative team anymore, and those 10-minute conversations had dried up after I'd redirected people to documentation a few times. Friday evening, I came home to find Bellamy already halfway through dinner preparation. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled our apartment, warm and ordinary in a way that made my throat unexpectedly tight. You're home early again. She looked up from chopping vegetables, her face brightening with genuine pleasure. 4 days in a row. Is this the new normal, or are you going to tell me you need to log on after dinner? It's the new normal. I dropped my bag by the door and crossed to her, wrapping my arms around her shoulders from behind. She was solid and warm, and I pressed my forehead against her back. I'm actually home. What happened? Her hands stilled on the cutting board. The last time you were home before 8 on a weekday, I think we were still in college. I had been avoiding this conversation, but Bellamy had earned the truth. I pulled back and leaned against the counter, trying to find the right words. Mason pulled me off the Phoenix Initiative. Put some guy who's been here less than a year in charge because apparently he moves faster. The knife hit the cutting board harder than necessary. He did what? It's fine. I'm handling it. Handling it how? She turned to face me fully, setting down the knife. Because you've been coming home at reasonable hours, which I love, but you also have that look you get when you're processing something big. What look? The one where you're making decisions and not telling anyone what they are until you've already committed. She wiped her hands on a towel. Talk to me. So I did. I told her about the reassignment, about the 7 years of overwork and underappreciation, about the decision I'd made to stop carrying weight that was never supposed to be mine to carry. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from anger to concern to something I couldn't quite name. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. How much of your life has this job taken? The question landed like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean, she gestured vaguely with the towel. When's the last time we actually hung out? When's the last time you read a book that wasn't technical documentation? When's the last time you seemed excited about anything that wasn't solving some crisis at work? I opened my mouth and discovered I had no answer ready. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Bellamy continued, her voice gentle but relentless. I'm asking because I've been watching you disappear into that place for years. I kept telling myself it would get better eventually, that they'd recognize what you were contributing, and it would be worth all the sacrifice. She took my hands, but they didn't, did they? And now you're finally setting boundaries. I'm terrified you'll talk yourself out of it because that's what you do. You'll convince yourself they need you more than you need your own life. They do need me, maybe. But do you need them? The question hung between us in the kitchen, suspended in the smell of dinner cooking and the soft, amber light from the window. Outside, the city moved along without urgency. People heading home to their own lives, their own choices about what to give away and what to keep for themselves. I didn't have an answer for Bellamy, but the question stayed with me through dinner. Through the evening we spent on the couch watching movies I'd been too exhausted to focus on for months. Through the night when I lay awake staring at the ceiling and cataloging all the ways I'd let peak technologies consume me piece by piece. When had I last felt genuinely excited about my work instead of just grimly determined to survive it? When had I last learned something new instead of endlessly applying the same expertise to fix the same recurring problems? When had I last felt like the company valued my judgment instead of just my productivity and willingness to work unpaid overtime? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong. It had been gradual, a slow erosion of boundaries and a steady accumulation of responsibilities that were never formally mine, but somehow became my problem to solve. The first time I'd stayed late to fix someone else's architectural mistake. The first time I'd skipped lunch to help a colleague debug their integration. The first time I'd checked Slack on a Saturday morning just in case something had broken overnight. Each individual choice had seemed reasonable in the moment. Taken together over 7 years, they'd built a cage I'd walked into one small compromise at a time. Monday morning arrived with an email marked urgent in all capital letters. Mason wanted to see me at 10 o'clock sharp. I showed up at 10:04. Not defiant, just no longer operating on the assumption that his time was inherently more valuable than mine. He was standing when I entered, his posture rigid in a way that suggested he'd been in back-to-back crisis meetings all morning. Close the door, Brinley? I did, then sat without waiting for an invitation. Small things, but they felt monumental to me. We have a situation. Mason's voice was controlled, but I could hear the stress underneath it like a wire pulled too tight. Production went down completely Saturday night. We lost 9 hours of service before we could stabilize it. I kept my expression neutral and waited. He clearly had more to say, and I was no longer in the business of making things easier for him. Damien's migration strategy bypassed several critical safety checks you'd built into the process. He paused, and I watched him struggle with the next words. He thought they were causing unnecessary delays. He was incorrect. I see. We had to roll back everything. 5 weeks of work completely gone. And we're still dealing with data corruption issues from the attempted migration. He sat down heavily in his chair. The executive team is furious. Our service level agreements are in serious jeopardy. We might lose the Gallagher Technologies contract over this. The name hit me square in the chest. Gallagher Technologies was our largest client, representing nearly 35% of our annual revenue. Losing them would mean layoffs, potentially devastating ones that would affect people I'd worked alongside for years. I need you back on the Phoenix Initiative. As lead architect, there it was. The recognition I'd wanted 4 weeks ago, offered now that disaster had proven my worth in terms Mason couldn't ignore. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired and clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in years. What changed? I asked. Mason blinked. What do you mean? 4 weeks ago, I wasn't fast enough. Today I am. What changed about my capabilities in that time? I kept my voice level and professional. Because my technical skills didn't change. My knowledge didn't change. The only thing that changed is that you're now experiencing the direct consequences of not having me do the work I was already doing. I kept my posture relaxed. So I'm asking you directly, what's different now? He stared at me like I'd started speaking a language he didn't understand. In 7 years, I'd never questioned him directly. I'd been the reliable one, the one who absorbed criticism and worked harder to prove myself worthy. This isn't about assigning blame, Mason said finally. It's about fixing the situation as quickly as possible. By putting things back the way they were, where I do all the work while someone else gets the credit and the decision-making authority? That's not, he stopped, reconsidered his approach. What do you want, Brinley? It was the first time he'd asked me that question in 7 years. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I realized I hadn't prepared for this exact moment, hadn't rehearsed what I'd say. But the answer came easily, built from a week of working reasonable hours and coming home to Bellamy and remembering what it felt like to have a life that existed outside these office walls. I want to think about it carefully. I'll have an answer for you by Wednesday morning. I left before he could respond, my heart hammering, but my stride steady and purposeful. That evening, I met my friend Zoe at the wine bar 3 blocks from my apartment. She'd been a senior engineer at Peak before leaving for a fintech startup 2 years ago, and she'd heard enough of my work stories to qualify as an expert witness on the company's dysfunction. Let me get this straight. Zoe swirled her wine glass, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Mason demoted you. The company nearly imploded without you. And now he wants you to come back and save them, essentially for free. And you said you'd think about it. She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Brinley Harper, setting boundaries. I never thought I'd see the day. What happened to the woman who once worked through bronchitis because a deployment couldn't wait? She got tired of being undervalued. I took a long sip of wine, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. But I genuinely don't know what to do. Part of me wants to go back just to prove I was right all along. Part of me wants to walk away completely and let them fail. Both of those are revenge fantasies. Zoe leaned forward, her expression serious now. What do you actually want? Not what would feel satisfying for 5 minutes. What would make you genuinely happy 6 months from now? I turned the glass in my hands, watching the light refract through the red wine in patterns that shifted with every movement. I want to do work I'm actually good at. I want to be respected for my expertise. I want to go home at 5 o'clock and not feel guilty about it. I want to stop sacrificing my entire life for a company that sees me as replaceable. Then that's what you ask for, not a return to the old arrangement with a fancier title. Zoe pointed at me with her glass. Real structural change. And you have leverage right now. They're in crisis mode. They know Damien can't fix what he broke. You're the only person who can. Don't waste that leverage on feeling vindicated. Use it to build something actually better. What if they say no? Then you leave, and you'll be completely fine. But I don't think they'll say no. Zoe grinned. They're desperate. And even if they do refuse, you'll have learned something critically important about that place. That they don't deserve you, and they never did. We spent the next 2 hours talking through scenarios and possibilities. Zoe had negotiated her way out of Peak and into a role with equity, flexible hours, and actual respect for her technical judgment. She knew what was possible when you stopped accepting the first offer and started advocating for yourself with clarity and conviction. The key is being specific, she said, signaling for another round. Don't just ask for better work-life balance in vague terms. Define exactly what that means to you. Hours you will and won't work, on-call rotation limits, vacation time you'll actually take, and they'll actually respect. Put every single thing in writing. That feels aggressive. That feels like respecting yourself. Zoe finished her wine. They've been taking advantage of your dedication for 7 years straight. The fact that it feels aggressive to ask for reasonable treatment is exactly the problem you need to solve. I left the wine bar with my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Not because Zoe had given me all the answers, but because she'd asked the right questions and reminded me what I was worth. Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into Mason's office with a document, 4 pages, single-spaced, outlining the precise conditions under which I'd return to the Phoenix Initiative in any capacity. He read it in silence while I waited, sitting calmly in the chair across from his desk. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to surprise to something that might have been respect, or possibly just calculation about what my departure would cost them. "You want final architectural authority on all technical decisions," he said slowly, reading from my document. "Direct reporting relationship to me, bypassing middle management. Dedicated budget of $75,000 annually for infrastructure improvements." He looked up, "and a salary increase of $32,000 annually. That reflects the current market rate for someone with my experience and specialization in cloud architecture." I checked multiple sources. "This is comprehensive. You asked what I wanted. Those are my terms." I kept my hands folded in my lap, my voice steady. "I'm not interested in symbolic gestures or empty promises. I'm not interested in a better title without actual authority to make decisions. If you need me to fix this situation, these are the conditions." Mason set the document down carefully. "You know Damien's going to have strong feelings about reporting to you after being the lead. Damien can have whatever feelings he needs to have, but he'll need to earn the trust I built over 7 years, and that won't happen overnight." I paused deliberately. "If he's as talented as you believed he was, he'll figure it out and grow from this. If he's not, you should know that sooner rather than later. This represents a significant shift in power dynamics and organizational structure." "Yes, that's precisely the point." I met his eyes without blinking. "You moved me aside because you thought speed mattered more than correctness. You learned that assumption was wrong, and it cost the company dearly. This isn't about punishing anyone or seeking revenge. It's about creating a structure where that same mistake can't happen again." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk in that familiar pattern that meant he was thinking through implications. Then he picked up his pen and signed the bottom of the last page with a flourish. "You have a deal. HR will process everything by end of week." He slid the document across the desk to me. "I'll start the recovery plan today." I took the document, now bearing his signature, and stood. "Damien can attend all the meetings, but I'll be leading them and making the final calls." Brinley, he stopped me at the door. "For what it's worth, I should have handled the initial reassignment differently. I should have consulted you before making changes." I considered the apology, weighed it against 7 years of being overlooked and undervalued, and decided it didn't tip the scales much. But I nodded anyway. "Thank you for acknowledging that." By Friday afternoon, I'd assembled the core team, outlined a comprehensive recovery roadmap, and begun the careful work of untangling the damage from the rushed migration attempt. Damien sat in the meetings, quieter than I'd ever seen him, occasionally contributing ideas that showed he was learning from the disaster he'd created. The recovery plan was methodical and thorough. First, stabilize the current system and ensure no further degradation of services. Second, conduct a complete assessment of the data corruption issues and develop correction strategies. Third, rebuild trust with the operations team who'd been badly burned by the failed deployment. Fourth, redesign the migration approach with proper safety measures and realistic timelines. Each phase had crystal clear milestones, explicit rollback procedures, and realistic timelines that didn't sacrifice correctness for the appearance of velocity. After the third planning meeting, Damien caught me at my desk as I was organizing notes. "Can we talk privately?" I saved my work and gestured to the empty chair beside my desk. "Sure, I want to apologize." He looked genuinely uncomfortable, but sincere. I thought I understood the system better than I actually did. I made assumptions based on incomplete knowledge, and people suffered because of my overconfidence. The operations team lost entire weekends. The support team dealt with furious customers. All because I was too arrogant to admit I needed help and guidance. I didn't try very hard to help you. I admitted what I'd been thinking. I was angry and I let you fail instead of stepping in to help you succeed. You didn't let me fail. I failed on my own because I didn't ask the right questions. He rubbed the back of his neck. Mason told me about the new structure. You reporting to him, me reporting to you. I understand why that makes sense now. I want you to know I'm not going to make this difficult or political. I genuinely want to learn from you if you're willing to teach me. I studied him carefully for a moment. He was younger than me, confident in the way people are when they've succeeded quickly early in their careers, but with enough self-awareness to recognize when he was genuinely out of his depth. Not a bad person fundamentally, just someone who'd been given authority without the experience to back it up properly, in a system that rewarded confidence over substance. Here's what I need from you going forward, I said, carefully. When I explain why something matters architecturally, I need you to trust that I have solid reasons based on experience. When I ask you to slow down on something, I need you to understand that's not the same as stopping progress. And when you don't know something, I need you to admit it clearly, instead of guessing or making assumptions. I can absolutely do that. He looked relieved. I will do that. Then we'll be fine working together. I turned back to my screen, then added, read section 15 of the redesign documentation by Monday morning. We'll go through it together in detail, and I'll explain the reasoning behind the architectural decisions. He left, looking genuinely relieved, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take considerably more time. But the possibility of working together productively without carrying resentment around like extra weight. 3 weeks later, I walked into Mason's office for what I thought was a regular check-in to find Marlo Quinn waiting there. Marlo was Peak Technology's CEO, someone I'd maybe spoken to 5 times in 7 years, always in passing at company events. Brinley. Marlo stood and offered her hand with a warm smile. I've been hearing remarkable things about the recovery work. Mason tells me you've pulled off something close to a miracle in record time, just doing the job properly. I shook her hand, genuinely confused about why the CEO was in this meeting. That's part of what I wanted to discuss with you. Marlo gestured for me to sit. We're restructuring the entire engineering organization. We're creating a new position, Vice President of Infrastructure, with oversight of all our platform and architecture work across the company. After watching how you handled this crisis and reviewing your track record over 7 years, I'd like to offer you the position. The words took a moment to process fully. VP, that was 3 levels above where I'd been just a month ago. We need someone who understands the technical depth and can make strategic decisions that consider long-term implications. Marlo continued, someone the engineering teams trust deeply because they've done the actual work in the trenches. Mason recommended you without hesitation. And after reviewing everything, I completely agree with his assessment. I glanced at Mason, who nodded in confirmation. The role comes with a team you'll build yourself, real budget authority, and a seat in our strategic planning meetings. You'd be building the infrastructure vision for the company's next 5 years of growth. Marlo slid a folder across the desk. It's everything you've proven you can do, just with the actual authority and resources to do it properly. It was everything I'd wanted without knowing how to ask for it. But I'd learned something crucial in the past month about accepting opportunities without carefully examining the conditions and implications. Can I see the complete role description and reporting structure? I asked. I'd want to understand the full scope and expectations before I commit to anything. Of course. Marlo pulled out a thick folder. Take whatever time you need reviewing it carefully, but I hope you'll consider it seriously. You've proven beyond any doubt that you have the capability. The only question is whether you want it and whether we can make it work for your life. That night, I spread the role documents across our dining table while Bellamy made dinner. She kept glancing over with barely contained curiosity, clearly dying to ask, but giving me space to process. They offered me Vice President of Infrastructure, I said finally. Bellamy nearly dropped the wooden spoon. That's incredible. That's amazing. Wait. She turned to look at me fully. You don't look happy about it. Should I be worried? I'm not unhappy. I'm just being careful this time. I pushed the papers toward her. I spent 7 years being undervalued and taken for granted. Then a month, proving my worth through boundary setting. Now they want to promote me 3 levels. And I'm wondering if it's real recognition or just desperation. And you're wondering if you'll end up right back where you were, Kai said, understanding immediately. Working 80-hour weeks, sacrificing everything because the company needs it and you're the only one who can deliver. Exactly. I struggle to articulate the fear. What if I take this role and 6 months from now, I'm back to working until midnight every night? Because that's what it takes to succeed at that level? Then don't let that happen. Bellamy sat down across from me. You have leverage now. You have a proven track record of setting boundaries and making them stick. Use both of those things. She tapped the documents. What does the role description say about work-life balance and expectations? Nothing explicit at all. Then make it explicit before you sign anything. You're negotiating terms before accepting, right? I nodded slowly, the idea taking shape. Not just accepting the role as offered, but actively shaping it into something sustainable. Something that didn't require me to sacrifice my entire existence to be successful. I could set clear parameters, I said, thinking out loud. Explicit expectations about hours and availability. Team support that actually distributes workload. Decision-making authority that prevents the kind of override that happened with Damien. Exactly. Bellamy smiled. You're not the same person who got demoted a month ago. Don't negotiate like you are. Monday morning, I met with Marlo and Mason together in the executive conference room. I'd spent the weekend refining my conditions with the same precision I'd use on a critical system architecture, and I presented them with complete clarity. I'll accept the VP role under these specific terms. I need full hiring authority to build a team that can distribute workload properly. So no single person becomes a bottleneck. I need explicit boundaries written into my contract about on-call expectations and standard work hours. I'll be available for genuine emergencies, but we need to stop treating urgency as the default operating state for everything. And I need a guaranteed seat at the table when strategic decisions get made that will affect infrastructure, not just implementation authority after decisions have already been finalized. Marlo listened without interrupting, taking notes on a leather-bound notepad. When I finished, she glanced at Mason, then back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. These are entirely reasonable requests. Several of them should have been standard practice in the first place. She set down her pen. I appreciate the directness and clarity. They should have been standard. I agreed calmly. But they weren't. So I'm making them explicit now before I commit to anything. I appreciate that level of directness. Marlo pulled out her copy of the role description and made careful notes in the margins. I'll have our legal team draft the employment contract with all these provisions included. Is there anything else we should address? One more thing. I took a breath. I want Damien to transition into a senior architect role within my organization. He has genuine potential, but he needs proper mentorship and oversight. If I'm building this team, I want people who can learn from mistakes, not people who'll repeat them because nobody provided guidance. Mason raised his eyebrows, but Marlo didn't hesitate. That's excellent leadership thinking. Consider it done. She stood, extended her hand. Welcome to the executive team, Brinley. This time, I wasn't stepping into a role they defined. I was shaping it on my terms. Over the next few months, everything changed. I hired 3 senior architects to finally distribute the crushing load I'd carried alone, instituted fair on-call rotations, made vacation mandatory, and took 2 full weeks off myself. No email, no guilt. Damien, given real mentorship and clear expectations, transformed. He still moved fast, but now he understood why safeguards mattered. 6 months after the original disaster, the Phoenix Initiative launched, stable, scalable, elegant, no data loss, no midnight fire drills, just clean, confident engineering. And at 5:15 p.m. on launch day, I walked out while the system hummed under the watch of a team I trusted. And Bellamy met me at our favorite restaurant. She raised her glass. To Brinley Harper, VP of Infrastructure, who finally figured out that excellence doesn't require self-erasure. To boundaries, I clinked back, and knowing your worth. My phone buzzed. Marlowe. Gallagher just renewed for 3 more years. Well done. I smiled, silenced it. It could wait till morning because I'd finally learned what 7 years of overwork had hidden. Companies will take everything you give and ask for more. The real question isn't what they need. It's what you need to protect. My revenge wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, and far more satisfying. I let them fail without me, then came back with the authority, respect, and boundaries I'd always deserved. 3 months later, in a leadership meeting, Mason floated hiring another move fast and break things engineer. I calmly pulled up my Phoenix post-mortem. 1.2 euros in outage costs, 43K in cleanup, nearly 17% year in lost revenue from almost losing Gallagher. Then the flip side. 0 critical incidents since. Plus 23% performance. Clients renewing because of our reliability. The room went still. Mason nodded. Point taken. Let's prioritize people who do things right the first time. Afterward, Marlowe stopped me in the hall. You've changed how this company thinks about engineering. And it's not just that. You made us see how we'd taken you for granted. Better late than never, I said. She smiled. Your leadership, setting boundaries, demanding respect, is exactly what we need. I'm rolling those policies company-wide. No more glorifying burnout. Back at my desk, an email from Damien. Thanks for believing in me. I'm learning more from you in a month than my whole last job. I replied, keep asking questions. Speed never beats correctness. That night, I got home early enough to chop vegetables with Bellamy while music played. We planned that hiking trip we'd postponed for 2 years. For the first time in ages, I was truly present, not just physically, but mentally, fully. And that was the real victory. This is nice, Bellamy said, glancing over as we chopped vegetables. You're actually here, not just physically, but mentally. I'm trying, I admitted. 7 years of bad habits don't vanish overnight. She squeezed my hand. You seem lighter. I looked around, really looked. At the plants she'd nurtured, the photos on the fridge, the quiet rhythm of a life I'd forgotten how to live. My phone buzzed, a Dev Enva alert. Someone was already on it. I turned the screen face down. That can wait, she grinned. Look at you, setting boundaries like a functional adult. We laughed. And in that moment, I realized this was the real revenge. Not the promotion, not proving Mason wrong. It was reclaiming my life from a company that had treated my dedication as infinite. Mason had mistaken my thoroughness for weakness, my loyalty for silence. He and the whole company learned the hard way that systems don't hold without the people who built them. But the real lesson was mine. I could say no. I could demand respect. My expertise had value, and I didn't owe it to anyone for free. 6 months into my VP role, I gave a talk on sustainable engineering, warning against trading correctness for velocity, invisibility for teamwork. Afterward, a young engineer approached me, eyes tired, voice trembling. My manager just handed my project to someone with no experience. Your anger's valid, I told her, but don't sacrifice yourself for people who won't value you. You're not obligated to burn yourself alive to keep others warm. That's not loyalty, it's self-destruction. Later that weekend, Mason called about a failing integration. Have Riley and Jackson send me their analysis, I said. I'll guide, but they'll fix it. And make sure they're paid for weekend work. We're learning, he said, almost proud. That night, I spent 55 minutes reviewing, sent clear notes, and closed my laptop. Monday morning, Riley wrote, "Thanks for trusting us." I forwarded it to Mason. "This is sustainable high performance. No heroes required." He replied instantly, "Noted, you were right." My revenge was never sabotage. It was silence. It was boundaries. It was walking away from the need to be indispensable. I didn't lose myself. I took me back, not in anger, but in quiet, unwavering self-respect. Mason's mistake was thinking I was replaceable. Mine was thinking I had to prove I wasn't. But in the end, I didn't just get my job back, I got my life. And that wasn't revenge. It was freedom.